Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Going Analog podcast, where four gamers get together, each bringing his or her own topic to discuss for everyone to discuss. I am your host, Shu, and today my topic will be Fantasy Flight Games Keyforge, which is a new weird business model for dueling card games. If you're the type to play Magic the Gathering, you're going to be interested in this one. Let me introduce the other people here. Nick, why don't you go next? Introduce yourself and tell us what your topic is.
Hey, I'm Nick Sutner. There's not much else to say about myself right now, but my topic is basically games that we played as kids and sort of what got us into gaming in the first place, as far back as you can go. Because I was thinking about a bunch of stuff for myself, and I'm curious what you guys played when you were kids and how you ended up playing games.
Next up, Mike.
Yeah, hey, it's Mike Zipkin. And so this week I wanted to talk about music in games and why I like to play music in the background whenever I have game nights at my house. And I'd like to sort of give some anecdotes about some certain games that I like to play with certain music and how like music can really enhance a game session.
I'm very excited about that topic, by the way.
And then we have Christina.
Hi, this is Christina Ha, and my main topic this week will be, as you're building your game collection, how do you like to organize it? On your shelves, what kinds of shelves, in what order? So I'm sure everybody has some fairly strong feelings on that.
Is there any other kind of shelf besides IKEA?
There's different kinds of IKEA shelves, though. So
You don't keep it just like on the big pile on your living room floor?
I've seen that.
Right now we do, actually.
Yeah.
But we're getting ahead. That's going to be Christina's topic in a little bit. But let's start with your topic first, Nick.
I actually realize it's a pretty big topic, so I'm not going to spend too much time on any one game, really. I mean, there was a bunch of stuff like, chess and backgammon that I learned fairly early on, and Monopoly. And, now Monopoly is pretty difficult to go back to. It's just sort of pure luck, and it just drags on forever. But I remember really enjoying it, and maybe it's just like, sort of getting a lot of fake money when you were a kid is fun. Or like it's just the fun of the chance of like rolling dice and stuff, and then everyone has their own house rules. So I remember enjoying it a lot. And I think though Taboo and Balderdash were ones that sort of got my imagination going a bit more. I don't know if you guys played much of that, but like Taboo is always a favorite, and actually still a favorite. That still holds up really well for me. So those are more sort of like as I became an adult who could express their thoughts of like Balderdash is like making up fake definitions for things, and that was fun. But another sort of like a revelation I had while going through this actually was remembering this book that I had as a kid, which I think was a big part of me getting into gaming that my dad bought for me at some point that I actually have a copy of now because I rebought it as an adult a few years ago and sort of forgot about it. And it's called The Book of Classic Board Games, which Klutz published. I don't know. Have any of you guys seen this thing?
No.
Mm-mm.
It's like a book that has 15. It's like a nice thick book that has 15 games in it, and each like page spread is the instructions on one side of the page and the board on the other side of the page, and then it comes with two little pouches. Maybe you can hear them here. I'm shaking them, of like these black and white sort of stones, like the type almost you put on like the bottom of a fish tank or something. And it's got a bunch of really great games in here. It's all like very classic stuff. Like they do have backgammon and Go and checkers, and 3D tic-tac-toe. They also have like some philosophy in the beginning of the book about sort of why they chose these games, but a bunch of them, like Hasami Shogi, which I played a bunch with my dad, which is sort of a smaller version of Go, played on like a quarter of a Go board. That's like a huge game in Japan, but it's not something you play in the US as a kid, probably otherwise. Or one called Dalmatian Pirates and the Volga Bulgars, which is sort of there's like that game that sort of looks like a cross-shaped board where it's a solitaire game where you're just hopping stones over each other to try to like leave yourself one stone at the end. It's like that, only it's 2-player. It's got Mancala, some game called Fandango, and it's just like a bunch of interesting games that are either similar to Go, where you're trying to capture the other player's pieces by surrounding them, or sort of similar to like checkers, where you're just sort of trying to get to the other side of the board. But it's a really great book, and it's got beautiful illustration. And I realized that book was probably pretty seminal in me just getting interested in different types of games and thinking about strategy in different sorts of ways. And I can keep going with a few things, but I want to hear what you guys have to say as well.
Yeah. So one of the, our people who commented on our Facebook also mentioned David Engo or David No said, I think the board games of our childhood were pretty terribly designed, but we were kids, so it was okay. And the board games designed now are way better and fit our desire for more depth in our mechanics. And that pretty much echoes exactly my experience. Growing up, I played probably a lot of board games since I have a lot of cousins, and I used to play a lot of games with my neighbors and my sister, but they were like Monopoly and checkers and Mousetrap. I'd play a little bit deeper games like maybe Risk with my cousins and stuff, but nothing was that great. It was just sort of a fun way to, spend a day when you couldn't go outside or something. But I think after college, one of my friends, Howard, he introduced us to Bonanza and Puerto Rico, some really fun games there. And that really sort of showed me that the games are a lot more interesting now. There's actually a challenge to it. It's not just roll and move, roll and move. So I was pleasantly surprised at that point. And then, of course, when I started dating Shu, that blew up. So we have a lot more games now.
Well, okay, you got to talk about our relationship about online.
Well, yeah, I could go next. So yeah, I mean, I like Nick. I definitely grew up playing a lot of Monopoly and like Scrabble and Sorry. But I do remember like the commercials for the bigger board games. Like I remember Fireball Island.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know how my parents could afford that, but it's probably my mom spoiling me, So I definitely remember having a copy of that and then like losing all of the pieces. And then, but then, I had another game, like anytime there was like a big 3-dimensional board game, like Mousetrap, or there was a game called Domino Rally, which was just like over the top and such a pain in the ass to set up. And really just not as functional as and cool as it sounded. But anyway, so we played poker through high school, I think, or like we started playing more, and we started playing for like $5. It was like, ooh,
big money.
There's like a little more tension involved.
One of those bad kids gambling at school.
I know, yeah. But it was really, I think it was Magic the Gathering that really like set me off towards like where we are today, or where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
Like I definitely. I grew up with Magic in high school playing with the originals. No, I can't say alpha or beta, but I joined at Unlimited. So right before Revised.
Yeah, that's about where I joined as well, actually.
Yeah, so like I had Moxes and like I was really into like I had like 3 Black Lotuses at one point that I stupidly traded away. But yeah, so there's all that regret. But so then eventually, like all my friends were playing, like we were all watching Star Trek, so we got into the Star Trek collectible card game, and that was really not that great of a card game, but it was just really cool to like we're all playing with our Picards and Rikers and stuff, and that was really neat. And we played D&D a little bit, and then eventually Richard Garfield came out with Robo Rally, which, having come from Magic, we all knew Richard Garfield's name, and so we all sort of played a lot of Robo Rally, and then Talisman was huge. Like I remember being introduced to Talisman at lunch and like playing that a lot. And that the artwork on that board was just like so, evocative and just really cool. And then on weekends, I would usually go to a different friend's house, and we would play Vampire the Masquerade. And so we would all play as like different types of clans of vampires.
I feel like I remember thinking that Vampire felt like a little adult for me thematically or something. I guess because I was like 12 or 13 playing Magic.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is like a little much. I don't know. It's funny.
I think that's what we liked about it. We kind of felt we're drinking Mountain Dew and staying up late.
Yeah. It's funny, like when you mentioned Talisman too. I think everyone has sort of a foundational like fantasy game too. I feel like either it was Talisman probably, or it was D&D, of course. For me, it was actually Hero Quest, which I would love to do a full segment on at some point in the future. But that was sort of like very light like D&D, where you have a DM behind a screen who's manipulating monsters, but they're doing it on a board, and you explore the board as 4 different characters, or there's 4 different people playing co-op against one DM. And I still have a very vivid memory of playing that with a friend for the first time, and I assume I was like 8 or something. And like my dad like came to get me at my friend's house, and I was like, we need to go to Toys R Us right now and buy this game. And it was like, I just remember like feeling so empowered. Like there was no way my dad could like argue this. I just said it in a way it was like, this is so important to my life that there's no discussion. We just have to go to Toys R Us right now and get this thing. And that, Hero Quest ended up being a big part of my gaming upbringing too. But anyway, Shiro, I want to hear yours too.
Yeah, I probably had a similar track to most people, grew up playing some of the like, same games like Payday, Life, and Monopoly and all that. And then I went through a phase where I was playing a lot of role-playing games, like all those old classic TSR games like Star Frontiers and Dungeons and Dragons, of course, and others like there's a gangster themed one. I forgot what it's called, like a 20s gangster themed one. But what I really attribute to my current sort of obsession with board games is one specific moment. So when I was a kid, I played some Steve Jackson games like Car Wars and Illuminati, and I loved them because they're so much more complex and deeper than the average board game. And then one time at work at the old magazine that Nick and I used to work at, Electronic Gaming Monthly, I was talking to one of our coworkers, Shane Bettenhausen, about this old game Illuminati, and we're like, "Oh yeah, we used to love that game as a kid." I wonder, and then so I started wondering if I could find a modern copy of that. So I went to the store called Games of Berkeley, located in Berkeley, California, of course, and I found this game. But when I walked in there, I'm like, oh my God, what is all this stuff? Now, so I'm an adult at this point, right? And then I have disposable income, and I was just thrown into the store where there's all these games, board games, card games, role playing games, all this stuff I haven't seen in many years, or it was never really exposed to. So I got
Well, how long had you been at EGM at this point?
I don't remember, probably at least 6-7 years or so. But we never really played board games at EGM up until this point. So yeah, I went into the store, I found Illuminati, then I brought that to work and played it with people at work at EGM, but then like I went back to the store over and over and over again and asking the store people, recommend me another game, and then that's when it all kind of the really heavy board game collecting started for me.
And as a kid, you said it was pretty standard, like the other stuff we were talking about, just normal living room things.
Yeah, I think it's just the Steve Jackson games is kind of maybe the one different one
Right.
where, like one of our readers or one of our listeners, Gene Warren, responded on Facebook that he's like some of the classic '80s designs, and he mentioned Illuminati. All assumed he had a lot of spare time on your hands because yeah, Illuminati takes forever to play. It could take 3-4 hours to play, and it's.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a very good game by today's standards, but when I was a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Like all these things that you could do in this game.
That was also one of the games that I played first with you when I came over to your house for the first time and played Illuminati, and with Shane too, I think. And that was the time when I first experienced him cheating, and I was like, "Wow, you can cheat as an adult? How weird!"
Yeah, and now we don't play games with him anymore because
I
he's
know
a
he
cheater.
was like banned shortly
Yeah,
thereafter.
an adult cheater.
I got a nice Facebook comment from Dave Coombs, who used to work at Sony with us as well, who says, I found out about RPG and skirmish war games from reading White Dwarf and Dragon, because he was mostly into painting miniatures. The same magazines introduced me to Lovecraft. Back then, there was basically no internet, and both magazines covered book and movie reviews as well as scenarios for games. Mostly played Battletech and Car Wars and my own design skirmish games, and having access to a photocopier at school was a game changer. And that was something actually that for me with going back to Hero Quest is they also included sort of a template for blank dungeons to like make your own, which I meticulously like cut out little pieces and tape them to other things to like make my custom dungeons, which I'm sure I still have somewhere. And the one other one I would be remiss to say, but which I'll also say for a topic in the future, is Scrabble, of course, because I played it competitively for a while, sort of in and right after high school. I started a Scrabble club at my high school that I think like was quickly dissolved after I left, but but we had a decent amount of members while I was there, and I just got really into it. And I used to take the train out to the Chicago suburbs and play in a club where I was like the youngest one by like 20 years. And the next youngest guy was this guy, Brian Capoletto, who at the time was, I think he was number one in America and like fourth in the world. So it was sort of awesome watching him play because he's just basically playing a whole different game than I am. And I never actually played him, but I played like people who he would play. I mean, he would destroy everyone, of course, but it was fun like playing with, like 70-year-olds and being able to hold my own, and just sort of getting into a competitive scene a bit, even if they obviously weren't sort of my like peers and community. It was like fun getting into something like that. And it's also before I moved out to, well before I moved out to Chicago, to California, and got into video gaming and everything. So that was just, I think, a taste of like being part of something, of other enthusiasts in that sense.
I think that was a kind of a humble brag on Nick's part to say I was a young wonderkind.
I mean, I don't know. I was pretty good for a while. I won like lower rank tournaments, but I won some money.
Were you one of those guys that would always spell 2-letter words with 1 letter and like just clean up? Because that was the.
Well, you have to, though, for that level of competition.
I hate people who do that. I'm like trying to come up with like an 8-letter word, and I'm just like getting crushed by 2-letter words.
It's so funny playing, like, I realized this quickly when I got out to California when I would play Scrabble against people. Like, there's people just get angry at you, not only for that, but for they're like, I play some word and they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, look, I don't know what it means. I just know it's a word. Because in Scrabble, like, knowing what it means is like, tertiary. Ideally, you know what part of speech it is so you can conjugate it or add an S or something. But, like, and so people get so angry that, like, they're like, no, you can't play it if you don't know what it means. And it's like, that's not actually how Scrabble works. And there's just other interesting things about playing competitively of like 2-player is the only way you played. You would never play 4-player Scrabble. So even doing that now as a casual thing is like weird to me. But anyway, I'll save that for the future.
Were you into Words with Friends?
No. Well, a little bit, but mostly not, because the just little differences, like the tile values are different than Scrabble. So it's like this weird uncanny valley of Scrabble. That's not just identical to Scrabble.
That should definitely be another topic. I've got plenty to say on word games.
Yeah.
but-
No, I'd love to talk about
We'll
that.
come back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's weird when like when you sort of immerse yourself in Scrabble so much and then you try to play something that's like 95% similar, it just feels wrong. I did play Scrabble, like the Facebook one and the official Scrabble app for a while, but that's also not the same because playing competitively, you can like use dirty words. There's like this like black book that they use in proper clubs and tournaments. That's like the actual Scrabble dictionary, but the Hasbro one is like not inclusive of words you can actually use, and that's the same one they use in the app. So there's like, at least as of a handful of years ago, there was no sort of way to play proper like tournament rules Scrabble through an app or a site or anything. So there was like some weird hacked together, I don't know, crappy version. But
So how many of you guys played Magic back in high school or at any point?
Nope. I never played Magic until I was a grown adult.
Yeah, same here.
Wow.
yeah, we'll have to do a magic session at some point, Mike.
That's interesting. Like, I just felt like, growing up, Magic was kind of like the core thing that a lot of high school kids did in my, nerdy days back in high school. But
yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, just you and me.
That's true. I did actually skip over that. It's weird. I don't think of that as seminal a thing, but I guess it totally was. But it was sort of brief, I suppose. It was probably from like 6th to 8th grade, or 6th or 7th grade, like pretty intensely,
Mhm.
and then not really much as an adult. Although I had my deck until I moved out here, actually, and I sold my deck as part of like fundraising to move to California, and I totally regret it now because I wish
I've heard the many regretful stories. Just the fact that it's still going today is kind of just blows my mind. Like, people still get together and have tournaments for this game that still exists from when I was a kid. And I feel like the old man, with the lawn chair saying, "Get off my lawn." I remember Magic when you couldn't, when you could have Black Lotuses and Moxes, and the biggest creature was an 8/8 trample. It's like nowadays, like people are like, oh yeah, like you can't even play with those cards because that's totally tournament illegal. And so it's like,
I guess
great. Well,
I guess that's why it feels like almost a separate, like Magic is like a whole separate thing. That's why it didn't feel like a ramp up to board gaming for me. It just felt like, oh, I played Magic, which went on to be its own entire branch of gaming, which is like a separate thing because it is such a huge culture, and it's obviously it lives alongside board games, but it's like there is separate conventions and stores that are basically dedicated to Magic, and it's just a whole separate thing. But it is really interesting that it still exists.
yeah, I mean, it keeps game stores alive to this day. That's crazy.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, culturally, it was interesting to me because, when I remember people played a lot in junior high and high school, but they were all boys, and none of my girlfriends ever played it. So I never was even really exposed to it. So it was never even like on my radar as something I could play. It just seemed like such a boy thing to do. So it's really weird, but thinking back, like it never even crossed my mind to try to play Magic.
Right.
So
You were too busy picking up high school football kids. No.
no, I was busy reading in the library during my lunch break.
Another kind of
Nerd.
My last quick question on this topic for Shu and Christina, actually, because you guys are Chinese. Spoilers. Did you guys play any Chinese games in the household growing up, or like mahjong or anything? Was that ever around?
That's racist.
Oh my god.
I played Chinese checkers for sure. I enjoyed Chinese checkers. I still think it's fun. It's super bright and colorful. Actually, that brings up, I think most of the gaming that I did that was, more regular was probably card games.
Mhm.
And I would play this one card game with my whole family, like all my cousins, my mom, my grandma. We'd play this game called Big Two, sometimes known as Deuce or Chodai Di in Cantonese.
Mhm.
And it's like the biggest thing. We just have like tournaments in our family, and like, the winner would win money and stuff like that.
Wow, I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
Wow.
So super fun.
No mahjong though?
My parents tried teaching me mahjong at one point, but because I didn't really grow up reading and writing Chinese, I was a little too Americanized, even at a young age. It didn't really take for me.
That's interesting because yeah, I played it with a friend a couple years ago and thought it was really great. It just sort of like pattern matching. But anyway, I'm just curious, so we can move on to whoever.
Yeah, now that you're done asking racist questions to us,
You can ask
so
me if I like played like dreidel, which I did, by the way.
Oh man, yeah. Let's go into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm Jewish. We played some dreidel back in my day.
What are the best dreidel strategies, guys?
Roll gimmels
Yep.
and never stop.
Give it all day.
Right. Well, since we just talked about magic, I'm going to switch up the order of the next topic for a little bit and go into my topic, which is the game Keyforge. So this is a game that Fantasy Flight announced at Gen Con, which is the big
Final Fantasy.
event that just happened in August. And so this is a game by the same designer, Richard Garfield, and he came up with a new business model. And the idea behind this game is there's no deck customization. It's still a dueling, battling head-to-head game. But what you do is you buy a deck of cards. It's a box blind deck. You don't know what you're getting, but when you open it up, it's completely randomized. So there are 7 factions featured in this game in the entire series, and then each deck will feature 3 of them. But then you get a deck of about 30 some cards. And then on the backs of your entire deck will be unique. So they've computerly randomly generated the artwork. The name is going to be unique, and so your deck, your specific deck in combination of cards, won't be seen anywhere else in the world.
But your cards aren't random, right? The cards are specifically designed cards.
No, they're random.
Well, there's set cards in each faction. You get a random combination of these cards in 3
Right,
factions.
but each card within a card, it doesn't randomize the numbers or the
Yes.
okay.
No, right.
No, right.
I'm
That's
pretty
a
sure
good-
that, yeah, there's definitely like a category of like, how common this card is and for weighting purposes, it seems. So each deck has a certain number of rare cards versus common versus uncommon sort of situation. Yeah.
Right. Because I think they're gonna. I mean, I'm sorry, just to interrupt for one more second. It seems like every time this game comes up, people sort of have trouble getting their head around the concept. So I'm glad we're
Mhm.
explaining it because I think they have sort of a marketing challenge ahead of them to explain like why it's unique outside of to like very hardcore gamers. And even with hardcore gamers, everyone's like, wait, how does this work?
Yeah, every time we mention it on social media, we get a lot of questions, and there's a lot of people who are like really intrigued and excited about it, and then there's instantly, I think, especially people who are very used to the Magic the Gathering model,
Mhm.
they seem to hate it. But I think it's for a different audience. I don't think it's meant for that hardcore Magic player. But again, you get this deck. So if all 4 of us bought a deck in a store, this blind deck, we open it up, all our backs will be like the back of my cards will look different from the back of yours. But
Like, how do they differentiate the backs? By the way.
There's a different hero name, and plus the illustration of your main character will have like a different combination of like, I've got sharp wings and 5 arms, and you've got a different combination of body parts to put together a unique character.
Okay.
sort of.
yeah, it's definitely it's impressive what they're doing because it's almost like it's a randomly generated. It's like that old video game, that old computer game Spore, where you're just hitting the random button and then printing out a different creature that still feels cohesive, but it's just a silhouette. But they're printing those, whatever creature that was generated is only appearing in that one deck and will never be seen anywhere else. So the purpose of this is just so because you're not supposed to mix cards from any decks. When you buy a deck, it's a standalone deck that you never change, you never swap out cards, you never alter. So technically, if you're playing for fun, sure, you could do whatever the hell you want. But if there's tournament play or legal play, you're not allowed to mix and match. So the backs of every card in your deck should be the same in any kind of official play.
Wait, but sorry, real quick, Shu, you said because I want to make sure I'm clear on it still. You said that there could be there could be a unique creature that no one ever sees. Like what makes it unique in that case? Because I thought like that specific creature wouldn't change outside the back of the card.
No, you're right. That is a good clarification. Yes, for earlier, which is the front of the cards, what you're actually playing, the creatures and the text and what it does.
Yeah.
Those are not necessarily unique, but there are, like Christina said, there are different rarities.
Right.
So, like this really cool monster might not appear as often as some common creatures
Okay.
or artifacts.
But you'll never have a completely unique monster.
So you're supposed to pretend to be playing this this person maneuvering all of your allies.
Mhm.
So my deck is named after the person on the back of my cards, and they're like the main mastermind, essentially trying to use your allies to win this game. So the back of the card is always unique. You will have a unique name, and the silhouette of your character will always be unique. So that's
Right.
how you know that this card can only ever be played in this deck.
Right.
Okay, well, I have a question. So, besides the unique looks of each deck, how does the game actually play? Does it play similarly to Magic, where you have like a resource like mana that you spend on creating, building creatures?
So it's similar in terms of, on a very high level, it's a head-to-head battling game, right? And you're going to put out artifacts, you're going to put out creatures to attack. And it's sort of the easiest way to kind of differentiate this game, besides the unique deck sort of business model, is when you two things. I think I could sum it down to, there's two primary differences. One is when you lay out a monster, you put it in a row from left to, or there's a horizontal row in front of you. And when you lay out a new monster, it has to either go on the far right and the far left. And sometimes that matters because the card text might reference, if you are a flank monster, meaning you're on the outside, you might have bonuses, to attack somebody, for instance. So how
I'm
you
a flank monster when I go to a Brazilian steakhouse.
so how you play, where you play a monster or when you play a monster could matter. That's a small change, but probably the bigger one is at the beginning of your turn, you have to pay, rather than having like resources, like where you're like land and all that kind of stuff like you see in Magic, you have, again, every deck represents 3 of the 7 available factions. But what you do at the beginning of your turn is you pick one of those factions. So you might say, I'm going to play and I don't remember all their names, but
Sure, let's say
this faction, and then that means that turn you can only play and buy cards from, or activate cards from, that faction. So as you're looking through your hand and you're looking at what's already played in front of you, you have to balance, because maybe there's this really awesome card you want to play or you want to activate, but he's the only one of that faction. So do you want to burn your whole turn just to activate that one card, or do you want to play all of these cards from another faction from your hand? So that part's pretty cool to me, because it kind of narrows down the decisions of like, okay, there's only a portion of your hand and a portion of your tableau can be played at any time. And then you do, kind of more standard battling, like, okay, my power is 4, so I do 4 points of damage to you. It's a simultaneous attack, and then your character or your monster will attack me back, and you have other modifiers. So it's a pretty, because this is the first wave and the first set that we're looking at. It's not quite as complex, and because there isn't like a decades or whatever it is, however many years Magic's been around, there's not that many cards out yet. But there will definitely be a future where they just continue to add new cards to the system.
I think another really big portion of this, though, is although you are doing combat is a lot more defensive. You're putting your creatures and your monsters out in order to claim resources, and you're trying to use these resources to basically be the first to turn in, what was it, like open up 3 gates? Was that right? Or 3 vaults?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not just like whoever kills the most things is automatically going to win. You have to be strategic in when you collect these resources, as you cannot really put them in and you can't actually activate them until the beginning of your turn. So you have to somehow protect against people taking your resources away so that you can actually win.
So it's kind of like a MOBA.
Maybe.
A little bit. It sounds. I mean, it doesn't sound like Magic where you have 20 hit points that you chip someone away.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I like a lot more about it. Just because personally, I don't like just like combat based. I'm trying to kill you. I'll play those, and sometimes they're fun, but in general, like I liked games that aren't as like direct conflict. And although this is head to head, it felt different to me because it's more a race for resources rather than like, I just want to murder you. So,
Right. Interesting.
I have an important question from our friend Chris Cobb on Twitter, who says, I'm fascinated and bewildered by the concept. I've wrapped my head around the fact that each deck is unique. What I want to know is how they will keep people spending money. I know they aren't wanting everyone to buy one deck and be satisfied.
I think it's the curiosity of seeing what else is there, because it's obviously to be determined how much money this thing will make. Will it be a cash printing machine like Magic? But like I said, I think another comment from one of our Facebook listeners, Michelle L, said when we said we're going to be talking about Keyforge, her response was, no, 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 let me buy the whole game and make decks. I don't want to randomly end up with a suboptimal deck. So yeah, I don't think this is for players like her who want to customize and make the best deck with you want cards to work off of each other to create possible combos and to have this dynamic and this for whatever deck you're trying to create. This is meant to be a more accessible way to try to do a battling game where like me, for instance, like I like customizable games, but I find deck building to make that customized deck really time consuming, and I hate buying new boosters or new packs and then I have to rethink and deconstruct and reconstruct my deck. It's a lot of work for me. So I like this idea of like, all right, I'm tired of this one deck. I want to try something new, but just someone else build it for me, right? Even though it's random and it's not built, it's just kind of fun to be able to like, I'm going to just go drop $10 at the store, come home, and I have another new deck, and I'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
I mean, in your experience so far with you guys playing it, though, does it feel balanced enough? Because obviously that's the key. Where it's like, if random decks feel roughly balanced, and it's more about just how you play, then that's great. But that would be a big concern for me. So how has it been actually playing it firsthand for you guys? Because I think you came home from Gen Con with a couple packs.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and the style of gaming that I like, it seems to me that the pleasure will be in like when you open your deck, you play it the first time, you're learning what could combo, and then you would keep playing with that deck a few times to like really get efficient at it. Because although it's deck building, well, it's not deck building really. It's sort of hand management. I think there's a lot more hand management to this game than you would have in a regular deck building. So you can sort of try to build toward combos or strategically, decide that you're going to activate this at one time or not. So I think there's a lot more skill in how you play the cards rather than putting the cards together when you're making your deck. And I like that because, like Shu said, I it's a little bit too much when I have to lay out all these cards and figure out how I'm going to build a whole deck together. And then I think once you feel really competent at that deck, you might want to buy another deck to try to like explore how those factions work together and stuff.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Nick, they actually built into the game system a handicap system. So the weird part about all this, and again, this is to be determined because this game is not out in the wild as at the time of this recording. And I think it's releasing November of this year, but I'm not sure about that. They have a handicap system, so as they discover that decks are too powerful, there's a automated way to handicap decks. So that's the weird part, and I think that's the part that's going to turn out the really hardcore, again, those Magic players who are used to like super tight competitive decks, because it might be that you get lucky and you draw this really awesome deck, and then now there's almost this artificial like you're handicapped, right? You're like handcuffed to be able to not play it to its fullest because you randomly found such a great deck. So that's a really weird thing for serious gamers.
Right.
Although I think that though isn't too different from from Magic ultimately, like Mike was talking about, where over time they ruled out more and more cards from tournament play. Just a lot of them were rare, and they figured out a lot of them were overpowered, and so they just like, sure, you can play with us casually, but they they cut it off over time from playing in any like more formal setting.
The difference is it's like you lose one card in that maybe, or a couple of cards, where this is like your entire deck will be covered by this handicap.
Like tainted.
Maybe. We don't really know that though. So they haven't published much on when I checked the instructions on how that works. It may be certain cards become more expensive to bring in or something along those lines, but we don't know like the details on how the handicap system is going to work.
Oh, that is, they did publish that, and that is what it is. Like certain cards become more expensive to put out.
Yeah, so it's not the whole deck though, but it's certain cards.
But anyways, it's a really interesting business model. It's almost impossible to say without going through a bunch of decks like how it's going to play out in the long run. But I think it's cool just in terms of it's a really different style of game. It's not the same as it's not trying to be another Magic the Gathering or Netrunner or whatever. And it's just a really interesting new idea. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to work in the real world. Like if people are going to really be buying this, or will it flop? We'll see.
Yeah, you guys should bring it up again, do another topic in like December or something after it's been out for a month and see how it's gone over.
Like follow up. Yeah.
Mhm.
I just think it's funny how you keep describing it as a business model, because it doesn't sound like, I can't tell if it's fun. It just sounds like they're just trying to make money in a different way, and I'm not sure if I'm ready.
I don't know. I enjoyed it. We've only played it a couple times, but the interesting thing was when during the fantasy flight, I wanted to say Final Fantasy again, during their presser, Richard Garfield was really talking about how, the subtext was he was unhappy with how, commercialized the magic cards have gotten and how you can buy your way to a better deck. And he really wanted to find, a new way to play a game where that just couldn't be possible.
And that does sound pretty cool. I still don't hear, I know it sounds like you enjoy the game, but I'm still not quite sold on the mechanics. I have to see it and play it.
Oh yeah, I would say real quick before we move on, the reason why I keep referring it to a business model, because to me that's very much like I'm impressed by this new idea, like the how you have to print unique backs and create a deck that no one else will have. So I'm really intrigued by this idea of like how on earth did a manufacturer, like I forgot the number they quoted, but they said it's some crazy figure that you never would have imagined of how many possible decks there could be, and no two are supposed to be alike. So it's just insane to me that they thought of this. And I think obviously building for a future business has to be on their mind when they created this. But it's hard to say, like we both enjoyed it. We both discussed after Christina and I played for the first time. We're like, that was fun. But wouldn't say, it's hard to say whether I love it or not, because I think it's through playing a lot of different decks over time and seeing all the different ways different cards can interact before you would really know. But that's going to cost money, right? That's going to.
Yeah, I just keep hearing a cash register sound going off.
Yeah, totally.
By the way, quick aside, but huge props to Richard Garfield for not only though, like whether it works or not, trying to innovate hugely in the collectible like card scene, but also just being like an awesome, like casually incredible designer the rest of the time too. Like I played Bunny Kingdom a couple times recently, which you guys introduced to me last year at Gen Con where it debuted, and it's just like a really great game that he made. And by the way, I got my free upgraded larger board just for paying the $10 shipping, which is very nice and comfortable. And then also like King of Tokyo, like I would say one of the best games ever. Like it just amazing that he's able to be such like a incredible diverse designer and be the father of Magic and still be innovating business models. So props to him.
Cool. And our current favorite party game, Hive Mind.
Oh right, yeah, man,
prolific.
Heck.
Okay, so let's move on to something a little bit more lighter and casual. Christina, why don't you remind us what your topic is?
Yeah, my topic was sort of how you guys like to organize all the board games that you collect. So whether your collection is 10, 20 games or hundreds of games like our collection, it's always sort of interesting to see how people organize it. I was very proud of myself for coming up with our organization system when we moved into our last house. We have just a whole bunch of billy shelves since they just fit really well into one of our main gaming rooms. So we just
also that line,
yes,
one of our
that's a
main
key.
gaming rooms, gives you a sense of the scale you're talking about here. Not one of our
Yeah,
second
that's
or
true.
lesser gaming rooms.
So we have those lined against the wall, and as we were figuring out how to put those games, we really like to host people and bring them over, but a lot of times, you're playing a certain number of games or you have only a set amount of time. So we organized it from left to right by how long the game takes. So that first shelf might have 30 minutes or under games, and then you've got your 30 minutes to an hour games, hour to 2 hours, and then 2 hour plus. games. We had a different shelf for 2-player games and a different shelf for party games. So that's sort of what we came up with, and it worked really well. So we'd have friends over for a game night or even just dinner, and we know like, oh, okay, well, we've got about an hour. Let's take a scan through that shelf and find something fun.
And one funny thing we like to do is if a hardcore gamer, like if one of you guys were looking at our collection for the first time, we would add, like a lot of people ask, we have so many games, like hundreds and hundreds of games. People ask, how do you organize this? And then we're like, take a look and look at our collection and see if you can figure it out. And then we'll have like these hardcore gamers just staring at these and trying to figure out what this sorting mechanism is. So that's always like a fun little meta game we play when people come over for the first time.
You should do it like in like High Fidelity, where Rob sorts his record collection by chronological biographically. So it's like when he bought the board game.
Yeah.
I mean, mine is like a complete opposite end of the spectrum, and it's very sad because I live in a pretty small 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, and so mine is like basically it's like playing a game of Tetris where if you can't manage to fit a piece on the board, it just kills you because you die of stress. So like any new thing, like we have to find a way to put away, and we've been in this apartment for 9 years and long run out of space for any new possessions. So like if something new comes into the apartment, either something else has to leave or like we just have to make our shelves like denser somehow. There's no like, empty surfaces, anything. So games are just crammed in like however they'll fit. And now it's like anytime I bring one game, and honestly, this is probably partially why it's pushed me towards a lot of like smaller games and Japanese games, like small box games in the last like, year, especially because I'm out of space. So, but even if I add a small game at this point, it requires like reconfiguring, 15 other games. Like, okay, now this one has to move down, so this one can move to this other shelf. And I have games in this big sort of standing like black IKEA cabinet, and I have games on a shelf in the front hall, like where you walk in, where it's like these are the games that we like, but we don't mind if they get sun damage because inevitably something has to, because we have to put something on those shelves because it's for space. And then I have some like crammed in the top of my closet. So anyway, it's awful. I'm happy with my collection, and I know where everything is, and they're sort of where they need to be. But I yearn for the day one day where I have like a proper place to like store these and display them, especially things like Oink games, which right now are literally like stacked on top of each other in 2 piles, like 1.5 feet tall each, which is awful. I know, when they should be like this beautiful centerpiece.
Yeah, you have to find some sort of shelf that fits those perfectly.
Well, and it's also, here's the other problem, is that our place is like our apartment is so awkward because there's also no ventilation from the stove. So there's like a thin layer of grime over anything, pretty much over anything, especially near the stove, but over the entire apartment if it's like
So we should
up high,
not lend
untouched long
anything to
enough.
Nick.
So we can't really leave anything out. Well, there's one thing. I ruined your Harry Potter game with sun damage, and then I bought you a new one. So that happens sometimes. But generally, I have to store things away. I can't even leave it out. So even all my video games have like, are probably tainted in some way. It's like I have to put something in a cabinet with the door that can close. So like, grease can't get to it and sun can't get to it. So it's anyway, that's the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, you should get one of those display boxes that you can mount on the wall that has like a glass door.
Like in case of emergency, break glass with like an axe hanging in front of it.
Yeah, but then you could put all your Oink games in there and like they'd be looking all pretty.
I should, yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of what I went to IKEA looking for my video game collection, which I guess I could jump in. I originally moved into this. I moved in with my girlfriend at the time and now wife in a little 1-bedroom apartment, and basically there was no room to display any of my ungodly amounts of collections. So now that we moved into a house, though, I bought some IKEA shelving that has glass doors, which I always pictured in my head because like I always wanted something that would keep the dust out. And over time, like when I first moved in, we had those shelves built and everything else ready to store my insane collection of vinyl. Because when I used to DJ in college, I just stockpiled a ton of vinyl records, which I still have some. But over time, my video game collection and my vinyl collection just sort of like they just kind of took up space. So the way I organize is I have square boxes that are sort of the ticket to rides. I guess that's sort of like the size that everybody sort of describes them as. The ticket to ride size boxes are all in where the vinyl used to be. And so those are, taking up 2 shelves worth, and there's about maybe 50 games in there. And then I have coffin size boxes that are too big to fit on those shelves above that, but they're just kind of stacked up to the ceiling. And then off to the right, I have all my bookshelf-sized Euro games mostly. And I like to joke with these guys because I have the best collection of beige board games you've ever seen. And I'm very proud of that. I play a lot of mid-weight Euros, and so I put the harder to find stuff high up where the kids can't get to it. And then I have like the King of Tokyo's flip ships down low, where I don't really care if once they're old enough they'll get into it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was recommending you a beige box game.
Which one?
Aura, yeah.
Oh.
Because you were looking for a Uwe Rosenberg game, who's a famous European game designer, and then I'm like, oh, get this one because it's beige.
Well, I wasn't just looking for Uwe. I like Uwe's games. I mean, we could save this topic for another discussion someday. But I was looking specifically at Mercator because it's an economic sort of midweight Euro game that John Gets Games on YouTube recommended. He was saying that he really liked it, and so I started watching some playthroughs, and I was like, oh crap, I have to buy this too now. And it's beige. Go figure. So.
Well, cool. And then let's move on to the last topic then. So this is your topic, Mike. And before you get into it, I'm going to read this tweet from our Twitter channel because someone asked a good question about this. It's like, please discuss what are good spy soundtracks / playlists to listen to while playing the Million Spy themed board games. That's from @SutterDan. So why don't you kick us off, Mike, and then maybe you can help answer that.
Yeah, sure. So as I was saying, like I used to have a long, like before I became a father and before I got married, I was a DJ for many, many years. So I had, so music has always been a big part of like, my way of, entertaining friends. And when I got into board gaming, just trying to find the right piece of music that people would be like, oh, what is that? Like that's the biggest compliment you can pay a DJ is just asking them, what is this song? So I love to try to find new music to turn people onto, and also to find music that kind of like a fine wine with a cheese, just like pairs well with the right game.
And by the way, real quick, so people out there know, like, so when you come over to my place, like I have a Bluetooth speaker, right? And I'll be playing whatever music, and then Mike will inevitably, Mr. DJ here, who's snobby about music, will just like roll his eyes or groan and make it known that my music's not up to snuff, so that he'll take over.
Well, hold on. It's not just that, Shu. It's that you have the most like completely random eclectic taste of like anyone I've ever known. It'll be like Disturbed next to Britney Spears next to like something good, and also you're so cheap that you won't like pay to make the Pandora ads go away.
Oh, he finally got Spotify Premium, guys.
After me like hassling him
a new life.
for years. So yeah, it's not. I mean, maybe Mike's a snob. That doesn't mean that's not true. But
yeah, I'm not going to argue that fact. But
so Mike will take over, and like I'm gonna take over the Bluetooth speaker and run my music, and it's good music. So I've actually, what you said about you helping me discover new music, that's happened. So yeah, so Mike knows what he's doing.
Oh, thank you, Shu. Well, yeah, so I like to find music also that fits with the theme of the game. So like one time, for example, like I came over to your place and I played Scythe the first time, and immediately it kind of struck me, it's very Cold War in theme, and so I was thinking, like in the back of my head, I kept hearing like the music of Eric Serra from the soundtrack on James Bond GoldenEye, and so I put that on. And then that was playing, and I think it fit the mood very, very aptly. So I think if I'm playing Scythe, I'm always going to think of the GoldenEye soundtrack.
I was trying to think of like if you mix like farming and mech, so you have like the Little Women soundtrack next to like the Terminator soundtrack.
No, do not do that.
He has to start doing some custom mixes and stuff for that.
Yeah.
This is also like turned into a big thing for me too, this is an awesome topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because I think for me, like because theme is so important in games to me, I sort of can't not do it. Like if friends come over, like it feels weird to just start a game in silence, like without that extra piece. Like it feels so important to me to set the mood. And a lot of things can like fall into a genre enough where it's like spy or sci-fi or western or whatever, where it's like you can do it. But it's fun thinking about specific ones. And also, by the way, the context of that comment, to spoil it, was my friend Dan, who just left my apartment like an hour before we started recording, and I just taught him to play Fugitive, and we were like struggling to think of good spy soundtracks beyond Mission Impossible and Bond. So if anyone wants to answer Dan's question too, if you guys have good spy stuff, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, yeah. So I had a couple. I mean, I've been thinking about that since you mentioned it, but like I can't really think of anything other than like a James Bond sort of
Yeah.
GoldenEye or Goldfinger. Like Goldfinger is like the sort of classic era of Bond where you get the down, 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 sort of like the classic iconic sound.
Mm-hmm.
But the more recent Bonds have steered away from that. They of course use that theme, as a way to come back to Bond. But I would try to steer him towards more. I know that Shu is into Eamon Tobin, and I think of when I think of Eamon Tobin, I think of his soundtrack for Chaos Theory, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. So I think Eamon Tobin's an interesting option.
Ooh, that's a really good one.
Anything trip hop is really good. Like anything that sounds sort of like dark and edgy is what I would pitch. So
that's like modern spies, basically.
Yeah. I mean, like when I'm playing a game, I do find it really jarring if we're playing like, a high fantasy game and somebody's playing Britney Spears Shoe or something like that. So I do like it to match a little bit, but I think a lot of times if you just run like Pandora or Spotify with like some theme, we always joke that like all roads lead back to Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the Caribbean. So like it just always plays if you have those sort of running playlists that they pick for you.
Yeah. So a few others that I like to do for people is like when we recently played like Black Orchestra, and this can go for any World War II themed game. I would highly recommend putting on a playlist that's just 1930s, era radio, and just let that play on a low volume, and it just sounds like those radios in the background of like a World War II movie.
Wait, but when you say that, do you look like, is that what you literally put into Spotify, or like how do you find that sort of thing?
So I use Apple Music. I'm one of the pariahs that doesn't use Spotify.
No, it's Apple Music's about to overtake Spotify.
Yeah, I mean, I love Apple Music. I've always been an Apple guy, so I kind of had to, and I jumped. I leapfrogged over Spotify, and eventually was like, okay, I've just been waiting for Apple to jump into this market. So anyway, so I would say, like putting on you just do a search for 1930s, music, and it'll give you like 100 tracks, and just let that play on a loop, and it's all that big, like big band sort of swing stuff, and it's perfect.
Nice. That's really a cool idea for just kind of, because that could be just background mood music. So like that we sometimes, besides like the movie soundtracks are like the easy way to find a theme, right? Like fantasy, Lord of the Rings, horror, you could pick a million horror movies like Halloween or Friday the 13th or whatever. But we'll also like go on YouTube sometimes and search for like feudal Japanese music or Japanese instrumental music to play something like Rising Sun, the board game, which is based in that sort of era. So there's a lot of cool things on YouTube. You can find like a lot of long playlists that will fit a lot of board games really nicely.
Yeah, a good one I did recently for Here Comes the Dog, one of my favorite Japanese games, which I'll talk about at some point, which is about like being around a campfire with dogs that might attack you, was just putting on like ambient fire crackling.
You didn't put on Baha Men, like Who Let the Dogs Out?
Oh God.
Oh God, yeah, I'm on a loop. But yeah, even sometimes I just feel like ambient noise can help with that. Also for sci-fi ones, like there's a lot of great sci-fi soundtracks. Moon is probably my go-to soundtrack for any sci-fi game. It is such a great mood. And then if you want a little more dramatic, like Interstellar is great, of course, and Gravity. Like those three alone cover like most, the spectrum of most like sci-fi moods, I think.
Yeah, definitely agree. And as far as like feudal Japanese themed music, like I remember playing Hanami Koji with like doing a search for like shamisen music or koto. Like the koto is like one of my favorite Japanese instruments, which is just basically like a Japanese harp that sits on the floor. And the taiko drum, of course, is a little intense. So I tend to look for like shamisen or koto stuff when I'm playing Japanese games.
So there are also resources for these things. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever used that site Melodice, which I haven't really used because I found I didn't quite agree with their taste, but I like the idea a lot of the game where you basically put in a game and it spits out like created playlists for you.
Oh yeah, I never heard of that one.
Yeah, that was also from Chris Cobb. He said, "I love pairing music with games, but I also love this kind of thing." And he linked to a site called Sirenscape that you seem familiar with, Mike.
Yeah, so that is like it's like a music mixer for the DM to use and to sort of heighten and lower the mood.
And that seemed like that seemed like soundscapes, not just music per se,
Yeah.
but like setting. It says like Sirenscape conjures every aural landscape imaginable, from ethereal forests and stony shorelines to dank vermin-filled dungeons and the spooky depths of the Underdark.
Can one of you guys spell that for, because it's not how it sounds exactly?
Yeah, it's SYRIN SCAPE. So Siren, SYRIN, Sirenscape.com. And it says you can get it actually for free, bundled with like 2 of the sound sets. So I guess that's how they sell it. And there's like, I don't know, $4 for more ones, it looks like, and you can create your own.
Yeah, I know they
Okay.
were really promoting that heavily for use with RPGs, like for Pathfinder and such, because it's supposed to have really good. I've never used it, but it's supposed to be good for setting the kind of tone and background and ambient noise for that. And another similar one. I don't know if it's similar, but another one that I use is called Tabletop Audio. It's just tabletopaudio.com. It doesn't have the best browser player or interface, but it has like a ton of different genres, and this guy just put out for free like either music or it's sort of ambient noises, so you could do, like, for example, a blacksmith or like a dwarven forge or these icy caverns, or he has like spooky sounds like for so basically you could go through and scroll through this gigantic list and just click and choose which ones you want to add to the playlist and just have it play, so you can build it's not like music like a actual song or anything like that, but you could hear, like, if you want to like replicate a tavern, for example,
Right.
you could have that kind
That's
of
cool.
music in the background, or something more monstrous or evil sounding. So it's a pretty cool tool. It's just not the friendliest to use, but it has good sounds in there.
Yeah.
I was just looking actually again on Melodice, which is MELODICE, so melodice.org. I just was curious to check again, so I put in King of Tokyo, and the first thing that popped up was a Pacific Rim soundtrack, which I will say actually is a great
Perfect.
pairing, but also generally that's a fantastic soundtrack that goes really well with any sort of like action-packed game.
Yeah, I mean, movies definitely are a great resource. Movie soundtracks are a great resource for finding background music for board games. But I'll just plug one more thing that's my own. So I've created an Apple Music playlist. If anybody's interested, I tend to listen to a lot of hip hop and electronica, and I'm always looking for music that doesn't have intrusive vocals and that fits with sort of a background sound when I'm wanting to play a board game, and that sort of carries the vibe that I want. And so if anybody's interested, I'll post the link in the show notes with the podcast. So if you want to check that out, I have some random people that have already found it and subscribed to it. So it's kind of cool that people on Apple Music can just find things by doing searches. But yeah, so you can, if you want to check that out, then please do.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome topics, guys. Thank you very much. Are there any kind of last thoughts or any other things you guys want to talk about this week before we sign off? Nick?
Well, yeah, I will say that I'm very excited because I'm leaving in a couple weeks to go to a trip to Korea for about 8 days, and then Japan for like 4 or 5 days. And especially in Japan, I'm going to go on quite the hunt for board games to find some of the rare Oink games that I don't have, and just do sort of some broader browsing. Usually, when I go to Japan, I go to Yellow Submarine, like the main chain that's around Tokyo, and I went to one in Kyoto last time. But since then, I found out a bunch of other stores. I just found I didn't even realize on Board Game Geek there's like a whole Japan forum, which is very dangerous, and there's a whole thread about like, I've been out of the loop for Japanese games for a couple of years. What have I missed? And then like a million recommendations, of course. So I have like a whole list of games I want. And then there's also someone actually made a map of that whole region, basically Japan and Korea and everywhere surrounding, of here's where all the stores are. So I feel like I'm gonna go spend at least a whole day this time in Tokyo exploring. And it's interesting because I talked about it briefly, I think maybe with the Oink games in the past, but a lot of the stuff, it's not just a matter of like, oh, it's always available, I just need to like pay the cost. A lot of it is actually just hard to find. Like last time I found some rare Oink stuff was like in the window display of a store that's not even really a game store, like outside, and those the only games that they had were like in the windows. So sometimes it's just luck. So it's sort of this fun like thrill of the hunt. So anyways, I'm excited to go find some cool games. I already, put out a call if you guys want me to pick anything up for you. And I'm excited to report back on probably the next show about what I've had.
I hope you please take lots of pictures because I would love to show those off on the video.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I will. And actually, you sent me, by the way, a very dangerous video, Mike, of this guy who lives in Tokyo, an American guy, I think, who is at the store called Surugaya, which sells.
Yeah, that's the name of the channel is Games for Gaijin, by the way, if anybody's interested.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so he does like his latest, like, here's my run for today, and he walks over to the back wall, which is just like this massive library of used like small box games of like hundreds of different things, and pulls out some. And it seemed like a lot of them were like, he even said they were overpriced versus where he'd seen them elsewhere, which was maybe good. Maybe that'll scare me away. But he also just found some really cool stuff. And in Japan, when something's used, it's like, as good as new. So that's going to be a fun place to explore.
How about you, Mike?
No, I don't have anything this week.
Okay. Christina?
We just played Quambra.
I think it's pronounced Coimbra.
Coimbra.
That was like your favorite. That was your favorite Gen Con thing, right?
One of my favorites, yeah, for Gen Con.
Yeah. Any other good, since we talked about it last week, but any other good 2-player games that you guys have played since we recorded last, since you're just making new friends now?
We have no friends. We played 2-player games so far.
That's what I mean.
I really enjoyed Spell Smashers since we were talking about word games. So it's like combining making words, but also with like attacking monsters. And it's like, doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's a really fun little almost RPG-like game, but you make words at the same time. So.
Let's definitely save that for, because Christina mentioned earlier and separately that she wants to do a topic one day about just word games, like modern word games. So it's going to be a fun topic.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't Spell Smashers by like an interesting designer or publisher? Like there's something unique about it?
Yeah, it's Renegade, and he's done Lanterns in the past, so.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, it was, which I wasn't a huge fan of, so I'll try this one.
Yeah, I recently played a great 2-player game that I didn't play before the last episode that I would wholeheartedly recommend, which is Targi. Have you guys ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah, super good.
Fantastic. Just a great 2-player worker placement game, and just really tight mechanics, really fun.
Yeah, I think you and I played that, Nick, a while ago, right?
Yeah, I think you introduced me to. Yeah, I think there's I feel like there's almost like a genre like that in Asante. These very like well-rounded, like medium scope, pretty easy to learn, and they also tend to have like I don't know, either a Middle Eastern or like jungle-y theme or market theme. There's a bunch of Jaipur fits in that as well, but yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it just came back into print, so it's easy to find.
Oh, nice.
Cool. And my last thought is just the game I mentioned earlier, Hive Mind. That's actually at my new job in our new city. We introduced that to a few people. We played like a 10-player game last week, and people loved it. People continue to love this game. Everyone we introduce it to, it's like it's sort of almost like Codenames was a few years ago, where everyone you introduce it to, they're just like, this is the best thing ever. I want to buy my own copy. So Hive Mind is like Codenames, where I wish I was in some kind of pyramid scheme, because we keep introducing people who buy it and they introduce it to people who buy it.
Do you want to say really quickly how it works?
Yeah, so it's just like sort of like it's by Richard Garfield, so it's the guy who designed Magic the Gathering, but it's nothing like that. It's a really light party game where, for example, I'll ask the group, the table, name 3 brands of automobiles, or name 3 types of fast food, or name 5 superheroes. And then everyone writes down their answers, and then everyone who answered the same as you score a point for it. So you're trying to think like what everyone else will think, right? Like think like the hive mind. Yeah. So it's a really fun game. It sounds simple. I don't know if even how I just described it sounds kind of stupid, but once you play it and you see how people answer, and people missing out on the very obvious ones or the really good answers will get super pissed. And but it's a lot of fun.
It's basically like I think it's a way more enjoyable, like funnier categories. Basically.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a lot more like, it reminds me a lot of like Family Feud.
Yeah, it's like Family Feud. The one other thing is that I tend to apologize for the art ahead of time, because it's not the coolest art.
No, it's not terrible.
By the way, I was going to also give a quick shout out to Tabletop Deals on Twitter, because everyone should be following that as soon as possible, which is tabletop_deals, which is a great Twitter account that like posts different random deals every day.
All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. This is perfect timing because I really have to go pee. But thank you. Enjoy your trip to Japan, Nick, and we'll talk to you when you get back. And everyone, thank you for listening. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Going Analog Show. And also you can send us email if you want, because Nick insists on having an email address for everybody, even though no one sends us any emails. It's letters@goinganalogshow.com.
No one in like the 3 days that have passed since we've announced it.
We'll see.
I think we need to dare people to write in so that Shu can be shut up.
All right.
And also, please, if you like the show, subscribe and tell friends to check it out if they're into games. And also, if you want to leave us a review or even just like a couple of stars or 1 star if you hate it on iTunes, ratings and subscriptions really is what like makes or breaks podcasts in terms of climbing the charts. So if you like the idea of us getting some more traction there, please help us out.
I'd like more stars than 2, so thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next time. I am your host, Shu, and today my topic will be Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy.
Wait, keep going. This is gold. Keep going.
I'm keeping this.
Yes, please do. What's your topic?
Fantasy Flight Games is. God damn it.
No, this is great. Leave it.
Keyforge.
Radio gold.
Keyforge.